Hi everyone, it's Katrina. Number 8. El Niño and the future of fire. El Niño is expected to intensify in 2024. You likely hear the term thrown around a lot, but do you really know what El Niño means? It's officially El Niño Southern Oscillation, and it happens frequently. The equatorial Pacific Ocean shifts between a warm phase and a cold phase every 1 to 3 years. It's something that pretty much always happens. Each phase influences the pressure and weather a little bit differently. The new phase will develop in the late summer or early fall, and then continue for anywhere from a few months to 3 years. The El Niño event is characterized by a belt of warm water that sort of hangs out off the edge of South America. The patch of warm water results in warmer weather across the globe. The warmer weather, as everyone learned this year, leads to extreme events like heat waves and forest fires. But don't forget about the unprecedented floods. In 2024, El Niño is expected to affect tropical Pacific regions for the first time in nearly a decade. At its core, El Niño is all about pressure over the Pacific Ocean. The pressure over the ocean drops, which results in more rain and heavier storms. Then, during La Niña, the phase where ocean surface temperatures cool down, the pressure rises and creates more stable conditions. But research shows that for at least the next 10 months, El Niño will be the dominant phase. But what does all this really mean for the future of Americans, and for that matter, everyone else on the globe? Scientists have suggested that if global warming continues, El Niño events could result in 200,000 American deaths per year. And believe it or not, it's already happening. In 106 cities across the U.S., there have been an average of 36,444 temperature-related fatalities since 1987. If warming reaches 3 degrees Celsius or 5.4 degrees Fahrenheit above pre-industrial averages, the death toll could increase 5-fold. That's not even accounting for droughts resulting in famine, catastrophic floods, and unstoppable forest fires. And now for number 7. But first, it's shout-out time! I want to give a big thank you to Canada Shocker and Metal Grandad for supporting this channel. Thank you so much! I want to give a special thanks to Canada Shocker for the video idea. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about amazing discoveries or dinosaurs or global disasters. Number 7. The hottest summer on Earth. Planet Earth just had its hottest summer in the history of recorded science. Data released by the World Meteorological Organization, or the WMO, showed that June, July, and August 2023 were the hottest months ever recorded. Global sea surface temperatures shattered records, while in Antarctica, sea ice melted at an alarming rate. The sea ice extent in Antarctica has been at its record low since reports began. And according to UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, climate breakdown has begun. If you were in the US this summer, you felt the heat for yourself. But the US was hardly the only place that experienced national heat records. So did Mexico, Spain, and China. In Mexico, there were 200 heat-related deaths reported, but those were the only ones that were announced. The real number of deaths could have been much higher. In August 2023, the temperature of the ocean at its surface was 69.76 degrees Fahrenheit. That was the hottest it's been since March 2016, and it's only going to get hotter. Based on data from the WMO, August was the hottest month by a massive margin. It wasn't just a little warmer than normal, it was hotter by a significant amount. The planet is currently 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit or 1.5 degrees Celsius higher than the average temperature between 1850 and 1900. I clarified in degrees Celsius because scientists have been warning for decades that if the world reaches 3 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial average, the human race could go extinct. And scientists say that as El Niño continues to take shape, 2024 could be devastating. Number 6. The Hypercane. Nobody likes a hurricane because they're disasters when they hit. But typically, hurricanes come and go over the course of a day or two. They form when the sea surface temperatures rise and energy spins into an out-of-control storm. But what if the ocean heated so much that the energy produced created a storm of biblical proportions? This hypothetical scenario is now entirely possible. The storm that could be created is known as a hypercane. If one ever strikes the USA, it could be the end. Cary Emanuel from MIT was the one who coined the term Hypercane. He came up with a theoretical formula for the creation of a storm that would be roughly half the size of the United States. From the state of Washington to Texas, the Hypercane could engulf the entire western half of the United States. Cary Emanuel theorized that if the sea surface temperature reaches 122 degrees Fahrenheit, the ingredients will be in place to create one of these storms. If you remember, sea surface temperatures in 2023 reached record highs. As of right now, the ocean is 23 degrees Fahrenheit away from potentially creating a superstorm. So, by summer 2024, with the current El Nino, the temperature could be enough to spawn a hypercane. But what would happen if one of these storms attacked? One important thing to know is that a hypercane would be much different from a normal hurricane. The storm would extend into the upper stratosphere, whereas normal hurricanes are restricted to the lower stratosphere. The wind speed of such a storm would be around 500 miles per hour, with gusts of up to 600 miles per hour. And because of the intense pressure inside the storm, they'd have a lifespan of several weeks. To put this in comparison, the strongest storm ever recorded was Typhoon Tip in 1979. For a single minute during the storm, winds reached a sustained speed of 190 miles per hour. A hypercane would be up to 400 miles faster, and the winds would continue for weeks, not just a minute. A hypercane would be roughly 8 times more powerful than Hurricane Patricia, which also had sustained winds of around 200 miles per hour for a single minute. But that's not even the scariest part of a hypercane. Pretty much any modern city in the path of the hypercane would be destroyed. People in the city would be subjected to devastating winds that seemingly never ceased. When the storm finally passed, ocean waters would be left extremely hot. In the weeks afterward, the intensely hot waters would be ripe for more hypercanes to form. The scariest thing about the theory is that if one hypercane formed, it would almost certainly lead to a string of them. It's a doomsday scenario, with such storms having the potential to rip open the ozone layer, leading to accelerated decay of oxygen and the deaths of all life on Earth. And yes, the ocean is about 20 degrees away from such a thing potentially happening. Number 5. The rise of solar storms. There's a big question of what's going to happen to marine life with all these weather changes. And are solar storms going to lead to more whales being stranded? Scientists recently announced that the solar cycle of the sun is quickly approaching its peak. This means that there will be a period of intense solar storms. It's the most active phase of the sun, which comes about every 11 years. Each time it happens, the animals of the planet suffer. Research has shown that during solar maximums, which have become stronger and more frequent in recorded history, whales beach themselves. Scientists think it's because whales navigate using the Earth's magnetic field, which becomes disrupted during solar storms. It's an ability called magnetoreception, and it's used by a surprising number of animals. Whales and other creatures use it to orient themselves. It's an internal compass, but it can also be used as a GPS system. Magnetoreception is how whales know exactly where they're going all the time. But during solar storms, when it's disrupted, they get lost and beach themselves. So what does the solar maximum mean for the human race? Well, it could mean a disruption of electronics. Many speculate that a particularly bad solar storm could wipe out the power grid on a global scale. That would mean that cell phones would no longer work, and the internet would become extinct. All forms of electronic payment would be rendered useless, so any money in the bank would be magically erased. A large solar storm could also completely destroy the power grid, which would take decades to rebuild. Scientists initially predicted that the next solar maximum would start in 2025. However, it could arrive sooner, in 2024. And if the next series of intense solar storms begins during El Nino, it could spell disaster. If a storm wipes out the grid during the hottest year in humanity, there will be no air conditioning, leaving people in heatwave zones with no way of cooling down. Number 4. The snows of El Nino. Everyone knows that an El Nino summer means heat and fire. But what does it mean for the winter? During El Niño years, there's typically more rain and more snow. La Niña years might be colder overall, but the precipitation drops significantly. It seems that the more intense El Niño, the more intense the snowfall is. The data has shown that with every 1 degree Celsius, or 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit, the Pacific Ocean increases its temperature. There's an increase of roughly 4.5 inches of snowfall. A strong El Niño year sees roughly triple the amount of snow as a La Niña year. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration already released its latest predictions. There's a 95% chance that El Niño continues through the winter and into the summer of 2024. There's also a 71% chance that it will be extreme. Given the increase in sea surface temperature during 2023, it's safe to expect a major amount of snow this year. U.S. cities could be buried under heaps of snowfall. It's also important to note that there's a big difference between El Niño conditions in the east and west. In most places, it may be warmer in the winter during El Niño, but it will still be rather wet. The west, however, will likely get colder, and this winter could reach record lows, with record snowfall and record flooding. So this winter, when everyone's asking, why is it so cold? You'll know the answer because you saw this video. Number 3. New York submerged. Climate Central is an organization of scientists and journalists whose priority is studying the impacts of climate change. And they recently released a map showing what New York City might look like if the warming trends of the world continue. Their map is based on the current trajectory for climate change, and it's set in a theoretical 2050. The scientists set their bar to medium, meaning it isn't the worst-case scenario, but it isn't the best-case scenario either. Even on medium, New York City will be partially submerged in the next 25 years. But the most substantial sea level rise will be in Hudson County and Bergen County, New Jersey. The lots of New York City will be underwater too, such as Newark Airport, the Brooklyn IKEA, Jersey City, the edges of Manhattan, Midland Beach, and more. This map isn't necessarily set in stone, but scientists do warn that every year it gets a little warmer, New York City gets one step closer to being underwater. Number 2. The mega drought. While New York might be on its way to turning into a water world, the American Southwest is turning into even more of a desert than it already was. In 2021, the Southwest mega drought turned 22 years old. And in 2022, scientists said it was the worst drought in the last 1,200 years. Prior to the mega drought, the last one of a similar scale took place in the 1500s. Scientists say the mega drought in 2022 was fueled by climate change caused by humans. Without the impact of global warming, the conditions wouldn't have existed. But as NASA climate scientist Benjamin Cook said, there may have still been a drought. There still would have been a period of dryness, that goes without question, but it wouldn't have been anywhere near as bad as what happened. It's true that there were periods of global warming throughout the Middle Ages, but they pale in comparison to the 2020s. There was some good news in 2023, though. In June 2022, 99% of the Southwest was in severe drought, but by June 2023, that number had dropped to only 28%. Utah, New Mexico, Arizona, California, Colorado, and Nevada are the states that make up the Southwest. And they were miraculously saved thanks to the 2023 El Niño dropping an insane amount of water. There was so much rain and snow that in just a few months, nearly 75% of the drought went away. But of course, that doesn't mean it's gone forever. There were still record temperatures being broken in 2023, so it doesn't take long for the drought to come back. Number 1. Death by 2100. Supercomputers have done the math, and according to the machines, the world will end by the year 2100. The planet is facing a mass extinction event. Scientists from Australia and Europe teamed up to develop a virtual Earth. Then they calculated the chance of its destruction using a supercomputer. The results of this study showed that by 2050, 10% of all living things will be dead. And by 2100, the number will increase to 27%. By that time, though, it will be too late. The extinction will have begun, and soon everything will go extinct. And scientists say it's all because of human beings. Overuse of the land, pollution, biological invasions, and climate change all play a factor in this potential apocalypse. All these things have worked together to set into motion a mass extinction event. There have already been 5 mass extinction events that scientists know about. One of them was the KT extinction event that saw the dinosaurs get wiped out. If you remember Kerry Emanuel from MIT, the guy who came up with the term Hypercane, one of his other theories was about the extinction of the dinosaurs. He wrote that a series of hypercanes may have been just as responsible as the asteroid. And now, scientists say humans are on the verge of the 6th mass extinction event. For the past 100 years, 2 species of vertebrate have gone extinct annually on average. The International Union for Conservation of Nature says over 42,000 species are currently threatened with extinction. Professor Corey Bradshaw from Flinders University said every child that's born today who lives into their 70s will witness thousands of life forms go extinct. Scientists used this information to create a complicated global food web. Then they predicted the fate of all the interconnected species. Forgetting about climate change and El Nino, the extinction of animals itself will cause the dominoes to fall by 2100. And the loss of biodiversity by itself will create an extinction event. So, putting everything together, the outlook isn't great for the year 2100. The loss of biodiversity, the rise of hypercanes, and a hotter world could result in the inevitable annihilation of the human species. Thanks for watching! Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed. Global cooling. Historical accounts discuss a dark fog that appeared in the Mediterranean basin during March of 536 AD. The darkness spread to other parts of Europe as well as Asia and the Middle East and persisted for roughly a year and a half, followed by a more than decade-long global cooling period. Crops were destroyed, snow fell in the middle of summer, killing crops and causing a massive worldwide famine. The Byzantine historian Procopius wrote, "The sun gave forth its light without brightness, and seemed like the sun was in an eternal eclipse through the fog." But what happened that year? Why did the world turn dark and cold? Until recently, nobody knew why. Life Science reports that medieval historian and archaeologist Michael McCormick and his colleagues analyzed an ancient ice core pulled from the Swiss Alps, containing more than 2,000 years' worth of microscopic history lessons. Particles of dust, metal, and airborne elements frozen at various levels of the 235-foot-long core hint at how the atmosphere over Europe changed throughout the past 2 millennia. A Saharan dust storm here, a silver mining boom there, and according to the new study, reveal that a massive volcanic eruption in Iceland directly preceded the beginning of Europe's darkest days. 2 volcanic eruptions, one that occurred in either late 535 or early 536, and another that happened 3 or 4 years later, triggered these catastrophic effects. The first eruption occurred in the northern hemisphere, perhaps in Alaska or Iceland, blanketing the sky in ash and toxic gases. Volcanoes also spew aerosols into the air, blocking the sun, causing the Earth to cool. This volcanic eruption cooled the Earth for 18 months, leading to widespread catastrophe. Summer temperatures dropped to their lowest in 30 years, experiencing a 2.9 to 4.5 degree Fahrenheit decrease below the average at the time, and the subsequent decade was the coldest on record in around 2,000 years. Just as everyone was starting to recover from the year 536, sometime during 539 or 540, the second eruption occurred in Central America. Ilopango, a now dormant volcano in El Salvador, blasted 10.5 cubic miles of dense rock and possibly 1 million tons of sulfur high into the sky, making it one of the biggest volcanic events on Earth in 7,000 years. And humans were around to see it. The apocalyptic event was severely felt by the Maya, with 40,000 to 80,000 people lost in the eruption and 400,000 people forced to flee. This eruption, felt in 539, just made things from 536 go from bad to worse, and it was only the beginning. Severe global cooling ensued, and temperatures remained uncharacteristically cool for many years. Known as the Late Antique Little Ice Age, this unseasonably cold period lasted for over a century in some places, including Europe, where it finally ended around 660, and Central Asia, where it persisted until 680. Plague of Justinian. One of history's worst plague outbreaks happened during the reign of Justinian I, arriving in Constantinople in the year 542, shortly after the onset of the late antique Little Ice Age. Nearly 100 million people perished, including 1/3 to 1/2 of the Byzantine Empire's population, and nearly half of Europe's population was affected by the plague during this particular outbreak, which swept through the Mediterranean region for around 225 years, before finally ending in 750 AD. Based on what happened this year, we all can sort of understand the fear and anxiety everyone must have been feeling so long ago. Justinian's plague originated in Egypt and made its way to Constantinople via infected black rats, who hitched rides on grain shipments. The disease's spread was likely exacerbated by mass migrations resulting from food shortages, as well as by traveling militaries en route to fight in wars, and troops tasked with cleaning the accumulating corpses of the infected from the streets. The movement of goods and people played a critical role in perpetuating the outbreak, especially considering the fact that black rats rarely travel far from their birthplaces on their own accord. Nobody was safe from the potentially deadly plague, including Justinian himself, who contracted and survived the disease. Even cats, dogs, and other animals fell ill. The Byzantine Empire was politically and economically hampered by the plague, weakening its ability to resist enemy forces, and contributing to the empire's defeat by the Lombards in 568. Urban collapse. The sudden deadly shift in climate from 536 onward played an integral role in the Byzantine Empire's collapse, but cities within empires also fell individually, succumbing to the turmoil inflicted by the cold period. The once thriving Byzantine city of Ilusa, located in modern-day Israel's Negev desert, was home to an estimated 20,000 residents at its peak. It was best known as a wine exporter, and the industry contributed greatly to the city's wealth. With public baths, a theater, churches, craft workshops, and a sophisticated water management system, Ilusa was uber-modern in its day. Despite its success, Ilusa collapsed somewhat suddenly and inexplicably within 2 centuries of its heyday. Historians originally attributed this abrupt decline to the rise of Islam during the mid-7th century, but a closer look revealed that Ilusa fell nearly a century later, forcing experts to look for other explanations. Researchers discovered this timing discrepancy by examining the contents of the city's municipal garbage dump and concluded that sudden climate change is to blame for Ilusa's decline. In a 2019 study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, zoo archaeology professor Guy Bar-Oz and his team found that the garbage dumps located on Ilusa's outskirts stopped receiving trash around the year 550. Discoveries like this reflect how scholars are still learning about the late antique Little Ice Age and bolster existing scientific evidence of the tumultuous period. 18 months of darkness and depression. The thick covering of volcanic ash and sulfur that propelled the world into a cooling period during the ill-fated year of 536 also imposed a lengthy period of darkness in the Middle East, Asia, and Europe. Historians have often called the middle of the 6th century a dark hour in what used to be called the Dark Ages. Medieval historian and archaeologist Michael McCormick told Science magazine that the year 536 was the beginning of one of the worst periods to be alive, if not the worst year. The Roman politician Cassiodorus wrote, "We marvel to see no shadows of our bodies at noon," describing the sun as having a bluish hue. Besides the devastating consequences crops suffered from the lack of natural sunlight, the darkness outside may have led to a darkness inside by severely impacting people's mental health. Even in modern times, there is a well-established connection between darkness and depression, often resulting in something called seasonal affective disorder. A 2008 study revealed the far-reaching effects light deprivation has on the brain, including possible damage in parts of the brain that become underactive during extended periods of darkness. So, on top of the already majorly distressing events going on at the time, many people may have suffered from depression in the form of altered brain chemistry. Extreme environmental events. The extensive atmospheric dust veil caused by the volcanic eruption in 536, and at least one more eruption that followed shortly after, led to the most extreme cooling episodes that have occurred in the northern hemisphere over the last 2,000 years. Along with these climatic changes came dramatic and unusual weather, amounting in what can be best described as a major environmental disaster. Snow fell in China during August 536, and summertime frosts and snowfall became somewhat of a regular occurrence in unusual places, including Mesopotamia, where from the large and unwanted quantity of snow, the birds perished, according to an anonymous Syrian writer. The bitter cold slowed tree growth as evidenced by the narrow tree rings produced during this period, and fruits and vegetables went bad. In the words of Michael the Syrian, the fruits did not ripen and the wine tasted like sour grapes. One season seemingly ran into the next without any hope of warmth. So we have had a winter without storms, spring without mildness, summer without heat, wrote Cassiodorus. Severe drought and other extreme weather plagued parts of Europe and Asia, triggering deadly food shortages. Viking Diaspora. Scandinavia may have experienced some of the worst consequences of the volcanic eruptions that defined the late antique Little Ice Age. Up to 3/4 of villages were abandoned in parts of Sweden, and formal burials decreased in parts of Norway by between 90 and 95%, suggesting that the dead were hastily buried. Altogether, Scandinavia's population decreased by at least half between the years of 536 and 550. Narratives from the time include references to Fimbulwinter, a mighty winter that served as a warning sign of impending Ragnarok, the Norse version of the apocalypse. Scandinavia also experienced civil unrest and an agricultural decline during this time. These circumstances may have inspired the 9th century exodus of large numbers of young men from the region. The Rock Rune stone, a 5-ton, 8-foot-tall granite Viking monolith dating back to the early 9th century, contains the world's longest known runic inscription, which includes possible references to the Cold Period that began roughly 300 years earlier. Etched by a grieving father named Varin, the 700-plus character inscription appears to be a eulogy to the man's deceased son, although its meaning eluded scholars until relatively recently. The runes also reflect Varin's growing anxiety over climate change and include the mentioning of something terrible that happened 9 generations ago, or around 300 years prior, fitting the time period for the onset of the late antique Little Ice Age. Varin's expressed fear suggests that stories of this traumatic period were passed down through the centuries, indicating that the grieving father related the past events to things that happened around the time he created the runestone, including a near-total solar eclipse, a solar storm, and an unusually cool summer, all of which occurred between the years 775 and 810. Widespread famine. After volcanic ash blocked out the sun, sparking the late antique Little Ice Age literally overnight, crops died en masse and produce was ruined. A failure of bread from the years 536 to 539 was documented in the Irish Chronicles. Can you imagine going without bread for 3 years back then? What were people eating? The answer? Not much. In short, devastating famines struck vast parts of the globe, leading to widespread starvation and suffering. In China alone, an estimated 70 to 80% of the population died in certain regions. Scientists originally thought that this frigid period only lasted for a few years, but a 2016 study of tree ring data from 650 ancient trees revealed that the bizarre weather changes persisted for much longer than that. This evidence coincides with 6th and 7th century reports of famine throughout Europe, indicating that neither the Cold Period nor the crop failures that came with it were short-term problems. Food shortages in the Far East may have prompted nomadic groups to migrate toward China, leading to civil strife and influencing warfare, alliances, and the collapse of empires. The study's researchers admitted that they were unsure of the extent to which climate change influenced historical events following the volcanic eruptions in 536 and 540 AD, but the drastically cooler temperatures undoubtedly directly impacted crop success and food supply, causing dramatic changes to our human history. Byzantine Warfare and Collapse. Byzantine Emperor Justinian I came into power in 527 AD, less than a decade before the disastrous events of 536 and beyond took place. In addition to the bone-chilling climate, lengthy darkness, and food shortages of the period, warfare also made its mark on the era. In 535, on the eve of the first volcanic eruption that triggered massive weather and nature-related changes, war broke out between the Byzantine Empire and Ostrogothic Kingdom of Italy. It was among the last of a series of conflicts involving the Roman Empire called the Gothic Wars. Determined to recover provinces from the fallen Western Roman Empire, which had been lost during the previous century, Justinian I commanded his forces to attack the Ostrogothic capital city of Ravenna in modern-day northern Italy. By 540, the Byzantines successfully seized the city and reconquered Italy, but the bloodshed was far from over. Numerous cities in northern Italy resisted Byzantine rule, and a Gothic revival further challenged the empire's power. The Byzantines ultimately won control over the territory, but their victory was far from glorious. Warfare had devastated the region and claimed many lives, and although the Ostrogoths were defeated, invading tribes challenged East Roman power. The controlling forces were not strong enough to maintain jurisdiction over the region for very long, and in 568, the Byzantines lost possession of much of the Italian peninsula to the Lombards. Economic disaster. No aspect of society was left untouched by the string of catastrophic events that started in the year 536. Medieval historian and archaeologist Michael McCormick has studied the time period extensively and led studies aiming to determine the causal factors of the late antique Little Ice Age. As ash blanketed the sky and crops abruptly failed, the economy ground to a halt, and it remained stagnant for decades to come. Europe suffered ongoing economic disaster amid starvation, extreme cold, and the rapidly spreading bubonic plague. Throughout 2020, we've experienced the debilitating economic impacts of the ongoing COVID-19 crisis and how much it has changed our day-to-day lives. Justinian's plague killed many times more people and occurred at a time when many other things were already going wrong and claiming lives. Food was scarce, the climate plunged into an extreme cold state, and warfare wreaked havoc on several parts of the world. The effects were nothing short of crippling. Europe's economy finally began to show significant signs of improvement around 640 AD, according to a late 2018 study of ice cores sourced from a Swiss glacier. The ice samples reveal a spike in lead content dating back to that time, indicating a resurgence of silver mining. Finally, the end of the Cenan Empire. Much like scholars mistakenly blamed the rise of Islam for the collapse of Ilusa, there is also a tendency to connect the advent of Islam with the fall of the Cenan Empire. While this remains a likely factor, environmental changes may have also played a role in ending the Cenan Empire, according to a 2018 study by Karim Alizadeh of Harvard University's Department of Archaeology. Although it's unknown exactly when the Sasanians abandoned their settlements, all signs point toward it happening sometime after the 7th century. The civilization's irrigation system subsequently fell into disuse, or so the story goes. Alizadeh proposed that the unsuitability of this irrigation system contributed to the fall of the Sasanian Empire before Muslim armies even entered the region during the mid-7th century. According to the scholar's claims, evidence shows that at some point, climate change rendered the irrigation system useless, forcing the Sasanians to flee their settlements for a more sustainable life elsewhere. To be clear, climate change may have helped to expedite the Sasanian Empire's downfall, but it did not spell the civilization's end. Warfare likely acted as the major catalyst of the Sasanians' collapse, and the possibility of climate change-related suffering raises the important point that there may have been additional factors at play, serving to further destabilize the already weakened civilization.
Thanks for watching! Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed.
Animals taking over streets. As many people continue to be on lockdown, animals have taken to the city streets. We have boars in Spain and Italy, horses and sheep all over the place, deer in London and Japan, and moose in Lithuania. Even more cautious predators are coming down from their hiding places like coyotes in San Francisco and bears and mountain lions who are now roaming through neighborhoods. A man reported to Bored Panda that he saw an alligator strolling in Myrtle Beach in broad daylight. He said at first he thought someone was playing a joke on him, but nope, it was real. The only other person around, a security guard, almost ran right into it. They were both shocked as many people thought there weren't even gators in the area known as Barefoot Landing, especially not in the parking lot. Italy's waterways are clearer. Italy, one of the coronavirus pandemic's hardest-hit countries, went into a nationwide lockdown on March 9th, heavily restricting movement within its borders and only allowing necessary travel. Venice, which is normally packed with tourists, is seeing hardly any boat traffic in its famous canals. As a result, in the time since the quarantine went into effect, the water has become its clearest in 60 years. It's so pristine, in fact, that you can see all kinds of fish swimming around. There is much less boat traffic that usually brings sediment to the surface. Without boats constantly churning it up non-stop, sediment remains at the bottom, making the canals seem much cleaner and more beautiful than they already are. The mayor has also pointed out that fewer boats and other vehicles means less pollution, leading to improved air quality. There have also been claims of swan and dolphin sightings in the Venice canals, providing society at large with hope of what types of animals are reclaiming territory they were previously pushed out of, and where they're doing it. However, National Geographic has confirmed that swans and dolphins have not actually come to Venice. Even though photographs and videos have gone viral on Instagram and TikTok, they aren't actually in Venice. However, the good news is that the dolphins were filmed at a port in Sardinia in southern Italy, and swans are native to the nearby island of Burano, near Venice. It's an unexpected side effect of the pandemic. People are excited to have some good news, and that at least something good can come out of this time of crisis. It's understandable that people are sharing feel-good posts without being overly concerned with fact-checking, and their intentions are mostly good. I think people really want to believe in the power of nature to recover. Psychology and environmental studies professor Susan Clayton from the College of Worcester in Ohio told National Geographic, "People hope that no matter what we've done, nature is powerful enough to rise above it." You have to admit, it is nice to see good news in these suddenly difficult times. Endangered turtles are nesting in peace. The olive ridley turtle is a kind of sea turtle threatened by coastal development, hunting, and fishing equipment, and its numbers are rapidly declining. Only 1 of every 1,000 hatchlings makes it to adulthood, meaning that protective action is necessary, or likely will be at some point. For now, the newfound quiet that comes along with quarantines and shelter-in-place orders is serving as a de facto conservation method of sorts in some areas. Olive ridleys at India's Rushikulia Beach, a popular tourist attraction, are benefiting from a quieter habitat during nesting season. Every year, turtles travel to the beach en masse to nest. Their slightly late arrival this year meant they had the beach to themselves, or at least didn't have to share it with humans, giving the olive ridleys more space and a calmer environment than they're used to. Whether this will lead to more of their hatchlings surviving remains to be seen, but fingers crossed that they have more of a fighting chance. Other animals are benefiting during India's lockdown, including estuarine crocodiles who are enjoying the beaches at Jolly Buoy Island in the Andaman archipelago, where they normally have limited access because they avoid humans. While on lockdown, people are noticing an increased bird presence, especially in and around Delhi, which is already well known for its avian diversity. Prabhat Verma, a resident who took up birdwatching from his 8th-floor balcony, recently told The Week that he spotted 30 different bird species in 3 days. And now for number 7. But first, if you are new here, welcome! Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already and share your experiences with animals during lockdown in the comments below. We'd love to hear them! Nitrogen dioxide pollution decreased in China. The term economic slowdown generally doesn't mean anything good, but China, which is notorious for its smog-infested cities, is seeing a few major unintended benefits. Shortly after the outbreak began and quarantines went into effect throughout China in December of last year, the skies became noticeably bluer and clearer, including in Wuhan, which is well known for its heavy smog and where the air quality has long been a public health concern. Satellite images captured by NASA show that since the beginning of this year, China has experienced a sustained decrease in nitrogen dioxide pollution. The same thing happened in Italy after the country went into lockdown, as evidenced by data and video footage gathered by the European Space Agency. While the terrifying coronavirus pervades the planet, resulting in less cars on the road, fewer industrial facilities in operation, and less harmful human activity in general, the environment is paradoxically becoming healthier in certain ways. Hopefully we will remember this and take notice. Marshall Burke, a scientist and Earth Systems professor at Stanford University, is trying to figure out if reduced pollution resulting from current travel restrictions and other pandemic-related policies could ultimately save more lives than COVID-19 may end up taking. This is a bold assertion, and Burke himself admits that there are limitations to his methods, including the fact that he has only considered one of the many air pollutants that are harmful to humans. His experiment may not last long anyway, as China's NO2 emissions have already returned to their pre-pandemic levels. Mountain goats in Welshtown. To limit the spread of coronavirus, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson recently imposed a stay-at-home order, allowing for very few exceptions. It's the most restrictive movement policy the UK has seen since World War II. A few days later, residents of Llandudno, a seaside resort town in northern Wales, I don't think I said that right, spotted herds of great Orme Kashmiri goats roaming the streets. They traveled down from their usual home atop the Great Orme Headland, a 679-foot chunk of limestone that rises from the sea and overlooks the town, to graze in flower beds and outside churches and homes. They were kind of surprised, looking around to see where all the people had gone. Some residents claim that while the goats sometimes travel to the foot of the Great Orme, they rarely venture into the streets. But with few cars and people around, they decided to step outside their usual boundaries and do some exploring and eating. Penny Ando, a local councillor, told CNN that in 33 years of living in the area, she'd never seen goats gallivanting around. Others, including the North Wales Police, who were contacted about the uninvited visitors, weren't too surprised to see goats wandering around town. Knowing that the goats would probably go back to where they came from once people go back out, law enforcement did not confront them. Carbon dioxide emissions declined. So I told you how nitrogen dioxide emissions decreased throughout China and Italy after quarantines went into effect. Carbon dioxide pollution also dropped to the tune of 25% over a 4-week period, according to a Carbon Brief report. During the quarantine, coal and oil industrial activities operated at below normal levels. For example, in Shandong province, oil refinery operations were at their lowest since 2015, and average coal consumption at power plants hit their lowest in 4 years. Annually, this only amounts to a 1% decrease in CO2 emissions. Moreover, the decline was short-lived. By the end of March, China's emissions and energy demand returned to their pre-crisis levels. Monkeys are rioting in Thailand. In early March, Facebook user Sasaluk Ratanachai captured video footage of a mob of macaques running around a plaza and engaging in a massive brawl at the Pra Prang Samyot Monkey Temple in Lopburi, Thailand. It's normal for the Lopburi primates to fight, but their behavior in the video indicates that resources are scarce. Ecologist Asmita Sengupta, who studies the effects of people feeding macaques, told the New York Times. Like at many other wild animal parks throughout Asia, these macaques rely almost exclusively on tourists for food. Amid the coronavirus pandemic and the travel restrictions that come with it, they are not receiving many visitors. China is Thailand's biggest source of tourists, and last month the number of visitors from the country fell by 85%, meaning the monkeys aren't getting enough to eat. The creatures at the Monkey Temple constitute a small portion of the thousands of wild animals in Asia who depend on humans for their meals. The lack of visitors and ensuing food shortage, as well as the macaques' erratic behavior, highlight the problems that can arise when animals become accustomed to receiving food from people, including aggressive behavior resulting from not being fed. Noise pollution has decreased in cities. If you've ever lived in a bustling city, you probably eventually became so used to noise you could sleep through everything from ambulances to trains and the crying baby in the apartment next door, with only a paper-thin wall separating you from his or her high-pitched screams. In fact, the thought of a quiet city might strike you as apocalyptic or eerie. Rightfully so, it turns out. As public transportation operates on a drastically reduced schedule, non-essential businesses remain shuttered, tourists are conspicuously absent, and urban dwellers stay cooped up indoors or travel several feet away from one another and in smaller groups than normal, so cities have become noticeably quiet. During her outdoor walks, Boston University public health researcher Erica Walker took a decibel meter and measured noise levels. She discovered that the urban landscape not only seems practically devoid of man-made sounds, it pretty much is. The pre-crisis acoustic levels at Kenmore Square, a busy intersection near Boston University, measured around 90 decibels, according to writer Marina Koren for The Atlantic. After social distancing, shelter-in-place, and other policies went into effect to slow the spread of coronavirus, Walker's meter recorded a rush hour reading of just 68 decibels. In some parts of Boston, she detected noise pollution decreases of up to 30 decibels. And as things quiet down and nature creeps its way into cities, people are hearing sounds they're not used to. 2 days into Wuhan's quarantine, Rebecca Franks, an American who lives in the city, heard birds chirping. "I used to think there weren't really birds in Wuhan because you rarely saw them and never heard them," she wrote in a Facebook post. "I now know that they were just muted and crowded out by the traffic and people. All day long now I hear birds singing. It stops me in my tracks to hear the sound of their wings." These calming, pleasant sounds of nature are one of the few enjoyable impacts of the pandemic, and they'll once again become obscured by the sounds of everyday life when things return to normal and people resume socializing and go back to work. My advice: if the area you live in is unusually quiet and wildlife is making its presence known, enjoy it while you can. Deer are invading a Japanese city. Nara Park, a 1,240-acre public park and popular tourist attraction located in Nara, Japan, is home to over 1,000 free-roaming sika deer. Many of these gentle creatures, who are considered sacred messengers of the Shinto gods, are trained to bow to visitors for treats. Like the macaques in Thailand, the sika deer at Nara Park depend on tourists for food. Visitors pay $1.85 for a stack of rice crackers to feed to the deer. But in recent weeks, as the Japanese government strengthened travel restrictions and began quarantining Chinese and South Korean tourists, visitors to Nara Park have slowed to a trickle at best, and the deer are hungry. Although they rarely leave the park, they've taken to the streets of Nara in search of food. People are spotting them in herds of 10 to 15 in places like subway stations and in the middle of traffic. They are eating residents' plants, and some are even becoming aggressive and biting people who feed them. Urban ecologist Dr. Christopher Schell told the New York Times that while it may be tempting to feed the deer who are wandering the city, it's best to just leave them alone, rather than encourage them to stick around in an urban environment, where they're at risk of being hit by cars and ingesting plastic and other hazardous materials. He maintains a positive outlook for the deer and for other wild animals who are ironically not used to fending for themselves. Most animals living in urban environments already have flexible diets, so chances are good that a lot of these animals are going to be okay. Raccoons at Panama Beach. As the coronavirus pandemic sweeps the globe, tourism has ground to a halt in San Felipe, Panama, much like it has everywhere else. Restaurants and bars are closed, beaches and streets are empty, and very few people are passing through. Matt Larson, the director of the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute in Panama, recently spotted some unexpected visitors at the beach. There were 3 raccoons just frolicking along right at the edge of the surf, he told The Guardian. "I've lived here 6 years and it was something I'd never seen before." The beach is normally crowded with visitors and patrolled by security guards, but with nobody there to stop them, the raccoons did as they pleased. While some people consider these animals pests, Larson enjoyed seeing them. "It was nice to see something a little out of the ordinary," he said, "raccoons dipping their toes in the water." Ecologist Paige Warren warned that life in quarantine may affect wildlife in other unexpected ways. For example, more species may become curious or emboldened, appearing in places we normally never see them, including American cities. On the other hand, she said that we may see less of certain creatures, including those who rely on humans to feed them or eat out of garbage cans. Thanks for watching. Stay safe and stay healthy. Be sure to subscribe and share your lockdown stories in the comments below. See you soon. Bye!